Velvet Regret, Mystery on Lilac Lane. Written by Donna K. Weaver. Narrated by Rae Kinsley. Chapter 1. If grief had a travel agent, Angie Hollenback suspected it wouldn't recommend driving halfway across the country with a funeral in the rear view and silence riding shotgun. But here she was, with no husband, no child, and way too many memories stuffed in the back seat. She hadn't planned the trip, so much as escaped into it. With every mile east, the world had gradually softened, though, feeling less sharp than the one she had left behind. With the well-known landscape emerging, even the air seemed gentler, carrying the scent of damp earth and nostalgia, and a hint of something sweet Angie wasn't sure she could ever feel again. But she wouldn't think about that. To the left, behind a curtain of birch and ash, the lake came briefly into view, a slate-blue mirror, cradled in the trees just coming into their fullness. Those happy youthful memories pushed at the darkness that had threatened to overwhelm her over the past few months. Angie should have come for a visit long ago. As she crested the shallow hill, the old wooden sign with its faded hand-painted letters came into view. Welcome to Wisteria, Wisconsin. The road leading into town sloped gently. Driving along Lilac Lane, her gaze followed the tidy storefronts under their cheerful awnings. Flower baskets hung from lampposts, heavy with late spring blossoms, while signposts announced lavender lemonade, half-off books, and even an upcoming town council meeting. While many of the store names remained the same, some had changed, making it feel like a story Angie had once known by heart, but didn't recall completely anymore. She pulled in behind Petals Confessions, her aunt's dessert café, and parked. It had been way too long since Angie had visited, thinking to come when life wasn't so busy. At the thought, the too familiar blackness of her grief threatened to swallow her. She pushed it back. That was why she had agreed to visit. As a girl and teen, she usually came in through the back door where the employees entered, but today she used the front entrance. The bell chimed as she opened the door. The sound had always washed over her as a welcome song. This time the tingle felt as muted as she did. But inside, with its scent of sweetness and lemon polish curling through the air, was warm with memories. The floral wallpaper had faded, but the soft lilac tones acted like a memory tucked inside a photo album and took Angie back to cheerier days. Merely stepping inside lifted her mood. A couple sat at a small table in the corner. Based on their expressions, they were eating something delicious. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." Aunt Cora came around the counter, her right leg on one of those knee scooters, arms already spread open for a hug. Carefully, Angie stepped into the comforting embrace. Her aunt's squishy yet solid body was still Angie's safe place. But something was different, too. "You've shrunk," she said, straightening. "Or you just grew." Her aunt gave her an assessing look. "Girl, you look like a woman who needs a chair and a cheesecake, and maybe not in that order either." Angie tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. "Aunt Cora, you weren't supposed to actually break something to get me here. I didn't do it for the drama. I tripped on the loose rug by the pantry. Again. But I figured since I'm down to 1 foot, and you need to forget." Cora's eyes glistened, and she blinked a few times. A lump grew in Angie's throat, as if she could ever forget her loss. But her aunt had suffered through grief, too, 10 years ago. The thought actually buoyed Angie a little. If Cora could get past it, surely there was hope for Angie. "What I meant is that I need help and you need to help someone. I figured we would wobble together famously." Aunt Cora gave a soft smile. "I'm so glad you came, my dear. I've missed you." "And I've missed you, too." Angie kissed her cheek. She then scanned the cafe's interior, from the old velvet-backed bench beneath the front window to the clutter of cake stands and stacked recipe books just visible from the back of the kitchen. Except for looking a bit more worn, it was the same. And with its comfortableness, the weight of the last few months eased just a little. "I've missed this place, too." Angie stepped closer to the end of the counter, where it met the wall. She brushed her fingers over the delicate inlay of wisteria vines on the chestnut-colored confession box, with its sign, "Got a confession? We have cheesecake." The long but narrow slot at the top had a polished sheen from being rubbed by so many envelopes, folded notes, and even napkins with hastily written missives. Angie had spent every summer and often school holidays here since she turned 10. But it hadn't been until she was 16 and thought she was in love with a clueless boy that she had buried her own confession in the box. And, metaphorically, the boy along with it. "Do people still confess?" Angie asked, glancing at her aunt. "You bet they do, though I only go through them once a week. You can help me sort them tonight if you would like." Cora looked over the rim of her glasses. "You know, as well as anyone, the psychological power of getting something off your chest." Her aunt had always had a gift with people of seeing things in their eyes, or their posture, or even the way they spoke. The kids Angie had chummed with had often joked that Cora was actually an oracle. "You look like when you were 16 and trying to get over that cute boy with the dimples." Her aunt's voice was gentle, but her mouth curved with a hint of mischief. Angie gave a soft huff and barely stopped herself from rolling her eyes. "That's ancient history." "Ah, but history has a way of repeating itself." Before Angie could think of how to respond, a loud thud outside the shop made them both jump. Then Cora grinned, her expression turning knowing. Suspicious, Angie peered at the tall, lanky man, now crouched at the door hinge, screwdriver in hand. He had pushed back his cap, showing blue eyes and dimples that had once made her heart race. "No way!" she breathed. "I thought he had moved to Boston." "His father had a stroke a couple of years ago," Aunt Cora murmured. "Rich came back to help. He stayed even after his dad died, and he's kept the business going and is now fixing what's broken, bless him. When I fell, he made me one of his projects." From the disgusted yet tender tone of her voice, Angie could tell her aunt had mixed feelings about it. The door swung open with a squeak, and Rich stepped inside. His slow grin brought out those delicious dimples. "Well, well," he said, his eyes crinkling, his face now carrying a maturity missing the last time she had seen him. "If it's not Leaky." Angie blinked. "Oh, my heck! You did not just use that name." "Hey, it's a classic." He strode to her and gave her a one-armed hug before bending down to do the same for Cora. Rich straightened. "Besides, you can't shake a name like that. It's carved into the walls of Wisteria." "That's because you carved it there." She crossed her arms and shot him a death glare. "Fine, Deaky." "Ow!" He winced just as he used to. He hated being called Dick or Dickie, but especially loathed Deaky, which she had named him after he'd refused to call her Angelique and dubbed her Leaky instead. Rich then grinned. "That's one I would have been happy never to hear again. I'll resist if you do, but really, I'm glad you're back for a while. Auntie C is too independent for her own good." Bemused, Angie watched him stride outside again and return to work on the window frame. When she was 16, Rich had unknowingly been her first love. More than a decade later, he appeared just as clueless about it. She turned back to find Cora watching her. Her aunt said, "If you want, why don't you drive to the house and unpack? Thursdays are slow, so I'll be home by 6. That's when I go through the confession box. You can take it with you and get a head start." "I can help you clean up here," Angie offered, though she really wanted to take her aunt up on the offer. "No, I need you refreshed tomorrow. It's Friday and graduation, so we'll be plenty busy this weekend." Feeling guilty about the relief Angie felt, she said, "If you're sure." "Go make my dinner, girl, and take the confession box with you. It's too hard for me to maneuver with it." Grinning, Cora scooted to the counter to accept payment from the couple. So, Angie collected the beautifully carved box. Now that she was older, it didn't feel like a keepsake anymore. Even as she realized it, the idea sat wrong with her, though she couldn't have explained why. Chapter 2. Rich slid a flat toothpick into the hole before screwing in the final hinge on the café's front window. When it settled snugly into the aged wood, he smiled with satisfaction. He enjoyed fixing straightforward problems with his hands, and found it unexpectedly satisfying. There was no fuss or confusion, unlike life. Inside, Angie was saying something to Cora. Leaky, here. All grown up, she fit her name, Angelique. Dang, but he had used the old nickname only as a reminder of their past. At 10, she had forced her way into his boys-only club after climbing the tree without a ladder and planting herself in the middle of their meeting. Angie had declared herself their secretary. The following summer, she claimed the treasurer position and finally president the year after, usurping Rich, even though he was 2 years older, and it being his club. He hadn't believed it when the other guys had gone along with it. Chuckling at the memory, he put pressure on the cafe window, pleased when it moved easily. It shouldn't leak when it rained now. He felt rather than saw someone brush past his back, but when he glanced over his shoulder, they had already passed by. From the corner of his eye, he noticed someone slipping into town hall, as if they were trying not to be seen. Odd. Then the scent of vanilla came through the opening of the cafe's window, drawing his attention. With Angie on the other side of the glass, the smell reminded him of the time she had caught Rich's girlfriend kissing another guy. Angie had dragged her to him and forced her to confess. Then, to comfort his broken heart, Angie helped herself to a giant sugar cookie from her aunt's cafe and brought it to him. But now she had a broken heart, with a shadow of pain haunting her eyes. And from what Cora had shared, his adolescent betrayal didn't come close to Angie's loss. Not that he was comparing the two. Hers was fresh pain, something he knew about, more than a little, and his heart ached for his old friend. Rich ran his fingers over the trim. It should hold well. After waving to Cora through the window, he gathered his tools and returned to his truck. But his mind kept coming back to Angie. So much of his return to Wisteria had included making peace with his past and the rift between him and his father. Evidently, the girl who insisted on tagging along on any summer escapade he and his friends were on was part of that. Rich couldn't remember why they had lost contact. Angie had been 16 their last summer together, as he prepared to head to college. At her suggestion, they had climbed to the top of the old water tower one night. If the chief of police had caught them, Rich would have been in so much trouble. He might even have lost his scholarship. But he did it anyway, because Angie claimed there were shooting stars that night, and they could see them better up there. After all the times he had bared his soul to her, it was the first time she had finally spoken of how hard it was to have parents who she knew loved her, but didn't really see her, of how Angie had always felt like an afterthought to everyone except Cora. Recalling it now, Rich realized he had been one of those people, always taking advantage of what she offered, but giving it little consideration. That night on the water tower, he never dreamed he wouldn't see Angie again, until today, when the past apparently decided to give him a chance to fix that. The car behind him honked. Bemused at how lost he'd gotten on his walk down memory lane, Rich put his foot on the gas. He had more work to get done before he could call it a day. It was a good thing he had put in the handrail at Cora's house. That woman suffered from a severe case of delusions of youth. She might have spunk, but lacked coordination on one foot, especially on the steps of her Queen Anne Victorian house. He had to pull over twice when shop owners flagged him down to ask for repairs. It wasn't until he had come home after his father's stroke that Rich realized how many people needed minor jobs done, but didn't want to call in an expensive plumber for something like a leaky toilet, or an electrician to install a ceiling fan. With Dad recently gone, though, Rich needed to decide what he wanted to do in the future. He kept getting calls from people who wanted projects that only a general contractor could legally take on. As a handyman, his license limited what he could do, and he didn't have that much insurance. But after spending the last year in Wisteria, did he really want to return to the big city architectural firm with its cold vision of metal and glass? Preoccupied, he almost missed the familiar man ducking into the shrubs 2 houses down from Cora's. Rich hit his brakes and leaned out the window. "Jonas, I thought you'd moved away." "Keep your voice down." The man shot a furtive glance in each direction before straightening with an exaggerated sigh, one hand tugging his baseball cap lower. "I don't want anyone to know I'm back for a few days. Leave it to you to catch me sneaking like a wanted man into my own house." Rich had to bite back a grin. Jonas had been in the class behind his and had a flair for the dramatic. "What did you do this time?" Rich asked, killing the engine. Jonas looked up then, his eyes red-rimmed. "Let's just say I finally accepted this little town isn't the stage for me. It's time to move on, but I prefer to fade out and avoid the full Wisteria send-off. You know Cora sees everything, and her niece has come for a visit." "Angie?" Jonas' expression brightened momentarily. "As much as I would like to catch up, I really don't want anyone to know I'm here. Please say nothing to anyone." Rich frowned, concerned now. "Can I help you with anything?" "No, I've got this. I just need a few quiet days. Then I'll be gone for good." Without another word, he slipped back through the bushes to what Rich knew was a path leading to the back of the house. Evidently, not everything his friend planned to leave behind was furniture. Later that night, with her aunt settled in her recliner, her foot elevated, and a bowl of ice cream balanced on her lap, Angie pulled out the stack of confessions she had sorted while dinner cooked. She read them aloud. Most were short and light-hearted. "I lied about eating the last piece of banana bread. I think I love him, but I can't say it first. I wish I had taken that other job." Some were more serious. Why won't he take no for an answer? Then there were notes written on stationery not provided by the café. Angie picked up one on thick paper with deep pressure marks. The writer had included a pressed sprig of blue petals. "This is pretty," she said, holding it up for her aunt to see. "Ah, a forget-me-not," Cora nodded. "It symbolizes true love, remembrance, and fidelity. It's a promise that lovers won't forget each other." Then why was there a smudge near the bottom that looked suspiciously like a tear stain? Angie read the note aloud. "I said something I shouldn't have, and now he's ghosted me. I don't blame him. But I can't stop thinking about him either. My heart is breaking that I've made a terrible mistake. How can I fix something once I've broken it? Full of regret." And Cora merely shrugged. Some things can only be healed by writing them down. Maybe they can move on now. But Angie set it aside to read again later. She couldn't put her finger on why it resonated with her. She understood regrets. Some sat quietly in the background of your life and faded with time. Others persisted, echoing in your heart, especially at night, when there was nothing else to drown them out. For a long moment she sat in the room's hush, comforted by the comfortable creak of the recliner and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. The last rays of the evening sun caught the edge of the envelope. It brought to mind the old Indiana Jones movie, where sunlight revealed part of their search. Angie picked up the note again. Something told her this mystery wasn't over either. Chapter 3. After yesterday's graduation chaos, Angie received an unexpected gift, a night of sleep untouched by grief-driven nightmares. Sure, it came with exhaustion, but as soon as Angie's head hit the pillow, she was out until morning. With quiet pride, Angie slid her cheesecake into the display case. She had been working to learn Cora's signature dessert, velvet cheesecake, and finally gotten her aunt's approval. Its smooth top had cooled to a soft sheen, which gave the dessert its name. Having grown up with this perfection, Angie had searched for different places with cheesecake on the menu, everywhere she and John lived. It had become a little game between them, a running joke that nothing could ever come close. Someday, she had always said, she would bring him here to prove it. Sadly, she'd been right. None of them lived up to Cora's perfection. Now Angie knew how to make it, and it was something beautiful to behold. From the kitchen came the unmistakable thump-slide-thump of her aunt's knee scooter, navigating its way through the doorway. "I said not to rearrange the counter," Aunt Cora called even before she entered the room. "Remember, I have everything's location memorized. If you switch things up, I might end up scooping caramel into someone's coffee by accident." As if that would be a bad thing? Angie almost laughed at the face her aunt pulled. Cora maneuvered near a chair and easily swung herself into it, before resting her foot on the parked scooter seat. Angie had moved closer in case the older woman needed help. Her aunt gave a mock glare, muttering, "You're hovering," though her tone sounded more amused than irritated. "I'm not hovering. I just like watching how you do that," Angie corrected, wiping the marble counter. "You know, in case I ever break my ankle." Cora gave her a flat look. Angie did laugh then, and it felt good. But her aunt shouldn't point fingers about hovering, since she was guilty of it with baking. Fortunately, today, only one item ended up in the reject fridge. Sylvia, the lady who ran the local food kitchen, would swing by later to collect it. Yesterday, she declared that even Cora's mistakes were worth sharing, saying that just because the frosting wouldn't hold the shape of a rose didn't mean the cake wouldn't warm a belly. Knowing that Angie's mistakes wouldn't go to waste had taken off some of the pressure. The bell over the front door jingled, and she turned to greet their first customer of the day. Good evening, ladies, Kirk Redding said cheerily. Cora had said he visited the cafe every day it was open. A retired high school chemistry teacher, he now taught gardening classes. Under one arm, he carried a rolled-up newspaper and a carton of eggs in the other hand. He also raised chickens, which produced more eggs than he could eat by himself. Her aunt arched a brow. "You know I can't use those here." "But you eat eggs at home." He set the carton on the counter. "And I have a fresh copy of the Gazette. Miss Minerva is in fine form today." "Do tell." Cora's eyes twinkled almost gleefully. Chuckling, Mr. Redding settled into a chair near Cora. "She's been sharpening her quill again. Her column this week deals with public indecency at the lake. It seems someone's cousin was caught skinny dipping." "Oops." Angie tried not to laugh, remembering the times she and her friends had done that very thing at night. "Was Miss Minerva very brutal?" "She spares no one." Cora smirked. "Slide it over, please." As she carefully unrolled the paper, Angie went to stand behind her aunt. The column was tucked toward the bottom of the second page, beneath an ad for used canoes and a recipe for rose jelly. "Plain speaking with Miss Minerva, on the risks of moonlight and other follies. When one's courage is emboldened by moonlight and mischief, the wise thing is not to pair it with pale flesh and the false expectation of privacy. Trust me, somebody is always watching. And these days, they often have a camera phone. A midnight dip may seem freeing in the moment, but gossip, like glitter, sticks to everything. Before you wade in again, consider whether your free expression is worth the splash it will make on Monday's social media." "Oh, no," Angie breathed, feeling a little sick. "Someone posted the picture?" "On the town's social media group," Mr. Redding said, amused, "with some clever fig leaves covering the embarrassing bits." "What an invasion of privacy," Angie grumbled. "Well, dearie, if someone wants privacy, they should save prancing around in their birthday suit for home, and not at a public lake," Cora added dryly. "I get it, but what kind of peeping Tom takes a picture like that and posts it? Personally, I'm more creeped out about that than the girl skinny dipping." Angie was grateful she and her friends had never been caught. "You look surprised." "Oh, that's right. You stopped spending your summers here about the time Herb died," Cora said, her voice turning tight, the old pain clear. The grief in her aunt's voice sometimes popped up randomly out of nowhere, even after all this time. What did that mean for Angie when she had so recently lost both her husband and her young son? She wasn't any closer to her parents and brother than Cora was to Angie's dad. Would her loss still be this raw in 10 years? For a moment, the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm her. "Angie?" From the tone of concern in Cora's voice, she had called more than once. "I'm sorry, what was that?" She wiped the corner of her eye. Her aunt gave an understanding nod. "Mr. Redding asked you a question, dear." "Do you approve of Minerva's article?" he asked. "Well, she was a little harsh." Angie gave them a half-smile. People always complained about tone when what bothered them was accuracy. But what she said is also kind of brilliant, too. A touch of snarky humor with a dish of wisdom. Cora's lips twitched. "I agree." The door jingled again, and this time 2 middle-aged women entered, both with cropped hair and matching windbreakers. They looked so much alike that they must be sisters. After greeting Cora, they each ordered a lemon bar and some lavender tea. As they settled at a nearby table, Angie caught a whisper between them. "I saw her at the hardware store last week," one murmured, "still wearing that old jacket of his." "It is so difficult to let go of something that important to you," the other whispered back. Angie turned her attention to plating the lemon bars, but kept her head tilted to the soft comments. It wasn't the words themselves, but the tone that struck her. There was something raw in it, like the woman spoke from experience. The conversation brought the confession note to mind. A thought came uninvited, that the lady they were talking about could be the writer. Angie dismissed it almost as quickly. Regret lived in many voices, and this one sounded settled in a way the letter had not. The realization left her uneasy, not because of the woman, but because of herself. But who had written it then? Angie had thought about it several times since first reading it. It left her thinking that if she knew, maybe she could help. Was it the timing, arriving on the very day Angie returned to Wisteria after such a long absence? Or maybe it was the way the note writer had folded it more than once, as though rushed the first time, but then made the creases again more neatly, as if the sorrow could be softened with that sprig of blue forget-me-nots. The words weren't overly dramatic. There had been no names, no date. Just one line kept coming back to her. What if I made a terrible mistake? It wasn't the question itself that haunted Angie, but that it sounded like something she might have written. Cora had gotten onto her scooter to pour the tea and murmured, "It looked like you were eavesdropping. Hear anything interesting?" "I don't know." Angie smiled faintly. "I'm listening to the rhythm of this place." "Oh, that. It's only the hum of the espresso machine." Cora arched a knowing eyebrow. "And women whispering things they wouldn't dare say at church." Angie laughed for real then as she set the plates on the counter. "Exactly. And I'm surprised at how oddly comforting it is to be here." And it was mostly true. It struck her as strange that Wisteria, which had meant so much to her growing up, could be untouched by the life she had built and lost. It had no memories of John and JJ, and that was both a relief and a pain. She should have made memories here with them. Cora deserved to have been more than the plump elderly woman on a video screen. Angie's family could have experienced the smell of sweet rolls at dawn, the hush of lake trails at dusk, the way her aunt told stories with her hands. But they hadn't, and now they never would. The certainty of it hit Angie somewhere below the ribs, sudden and stealing away her breath, the way it sometimes did. Not the big, drowning grief she had learned to brace for, but the small, ambushing kind. "Oh, sweetheart, why are you crying?" Cora said, wiping a tear from Angie's cheek. All she could do was shake her head and blink her eyes rapidly. Her aunt whispered, "Minerva says confession is good for the soul." Angie glanced up, glad to be distracted from her dark thoughts. "You really like her, don't you?" "Oh, she's all right." Cora tilted her head, "though she's a bit of a smart aleck." She scooted away toward the kitchen. Angie tucked the Gazette behind the register, but her fingers brushed the edge of the confession note she had hidden there. She didn't know why she hadn't thrown it out. Maybe tonight she would take another look. After Mr. Redding paid and left the kitchen, a large man stepped inside. His massive presence made the room feel suddenly small. Rich stepped into Petals and Confessions right behind Mitch Connolly, struck as always by how big he was. Even now that he couldn't play professional football anymore, he still took up space like a linebacker in pads. He'd always had a presence, including back in high school, turning heads whenever he entered a room. And he'd known it, too, and played on his natural charisma. Rich felt a little sorry for the guy now, considering how folks watched and waited expectantly, wondering what the broken football star would do next. He obviously wasn't happy working at his father's commercial real estate firm. Angie stood at the counter, looking about to welcome the new customer, but she'd narrowed her eyes like she did when she was trying to remember something. "Hey, Mitch." Rich stepped forward, clapping the big man on the back. "I don't think you ever met Cora's niece back when she used to spend summers here. This is Angie Hollenback. She's here helping for a bit." Mitch glanced at Angie for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he put on one of those public faces with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nice to meet you." He extended his hand. "Same," Angie said, shaking it. "I vaguely remember your name. Weren't you kind of a big deal back in the day?" When Rich winced, her eyes widened, realizing her faux pas. It wasn't Angie's style to take a jab at Mitch. Plus, she had no history with him, even if she were like that. But it struck hard since "big deal" was a ghost Mitch couldn't seem to escape from his past. "I'm sorry," she said quickly at Mitch's tight smile. "That didn't come out right." "It's all good. Just dropping these off," he muttered, setting a folded flyer on the counter. "Dad wants them posted around town." Cora reached over from her perch near the register. "Another mortgage seminar?" "Community outreach," he said a little too quickly. "He thinks it'll help build trust." Rich tilted his head, studying Mitch's posture. It wasn't just the defensive tone. It was the way he stood, weight unevenly distributed, left knee slightly turned out. Subtle, but telling. The rumors were true, then. Torn ACL, surgery, and some whispers said rehab hadn't gone well. Others claimed he hadn't bothered to do it properly. Rich suspected the truth was somewhere in between. "Glad to see you're out and about," Rich said quietly. "You holding up all right?" Mitch gave a shrug that tried to be nonchalant, but didn't quite hit the mark. "My leg doesn't hurt anymore. I just can't walk the same now." He turned to go, but paused beside the display case, his eyes lingering on the velvet cheesecake. "Still the best in town?" "Naturally," Cora said. "And only served here," Angie added with a smile edged with uncertainty. Mitch's lips twitched. "Guess that makes it easy to be number one." But his tone held no hostility. With a nod to Cora and Rich, he left, the bell above the door jingling in his wake. Rich exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "That was something." Cora arched a brow at him. "The boy's trying, Rich." "Trying not to punch a wall?" he muttered. "That man's barely holding it together." "I didn't mean to be rude or unkind," Angie said, her fingers tracing a swirl in the marble counter. "Was it my comment, or is he always like that?" "Not always," Cora said, staring out the window to follow Mitch's progress. "He used to be the golden boy. Without the shine, he's not sure who he is anymore." Rich nodded. He'd seen that before in Boston, with co-workers who clung to careers that had once defined them. It was harder to watch it in someone he'd known as a laughing high school student, even one with entitlement issues. Cora turned her head slightly, as if listening to something beneath the room's surface hum. "He's been hanging around the library a lot lately." Rich blinked. "What, reading?" "No," she said, voice loaded. "Asking questions." Angie looked up. "About what?" Cora's gaze sharpened. "About someone who's been scarce around town lately." She knew something. Rich frowned, trying to think what she could be hinting at. Cora Faust had an uncanny way of being in the know about townsfolk and local events. He knew better than to ask, because hinting was all she would do. "Could he be looking at new career choices?" Angie asked. "In the library?" Rich shook his head. "Mitch might have been a jock, but he's smart enough. He would search online." Cora only watched him with a curious smugness. What did that devious woman know about Mitch? Rich straightened. Maybe Mitch was haunting the place because of a person rather than information. The only person working there in their age group was Brianna. Hadn't they been an item in high school? And she had been conspicuously absent from town events lately. The hair on the back of Rich's neck rose. "Maybe I'll have a look at that flyer," he murmured. Angie slid it across the counter to him. As he unfolded it, Rich glimpsed another paper beneath the register, a sliver of soft blue with delicate creases. He didn't mention it. Chapter 4. By mid-afternoon on Monday, Petals Confessions had settled into a post-celebration lull. The regular morning rush had come and gone, leaving behind a quieter stream of customers. Some of the recent graduates carried a faint air of reckoning that had Angie and Cora exchanging amused glances. Cora had said the first weekday after graduation weekend was always like this. Until now, Angie hadn't understood what she meant. But as she wiped the counter yet again, listening to the snippets of conversation drifting her way, it became clear. People talked more today, second-guessing themselves about many things, especially actions during graduation parties. Minnie winced mid-sentence. Angie couldn't help but wonder if now would be the perfect time for the forget-me-not confession writer to let something slip. A pair of girls who looked barely old enough to have graduated hovered near the display case, whispering. One kept checking her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen, as if she were bracing herself. "I shouldn't have said that," the girl murmured. "I was joking." "Mostly?" The other tilted a brow, aiming for casual, but missing. "So just apologize. Everyone was messed up anyway." Except everyone wasn't the same as no one. But Angie kept the thought to herself. This kind of regret was immediate and raw, the sort that came with too little sleep and too many witnesses. It didn't carry the same weight as the confession tucked by the register. The young woman sighed and typed something quickly, then groaned and turned the phone face down. Angie caught the look on her face, a sharp flicker of hope followed by dread. Not knowing her didn't make Angie ache for her any less. High school and college weren't so far behind that she couldn't remember what it felt like to say something she wished she could take back. A few minutes later, a young man approached the counter alone, his hair either stylishly mussed or the result of too many nervous passes of his hand through it. "Hi," he said. "Could I get a coffee? My granddad suggested black." Angie remembered him from Friday, when he'd ordered one of the most complicated cappuccinos she'd ever made. She thought it interesting that he was asking for a simple black coffee today, until he winced at the hiss of the espresso machine. "That bad, huh?" she asked, entering the order. Tapping his card on the reader, he nodded sheepishly. "And I told my girlfriend I was totally over her." Angie grimaced as she poured the coffee. "And you're not?" "No," he groaned, looking like he would like to bang his head on the counter. "Well, dang." She snapped the lid in place and slid the cup into a zarf. "When your stomach's up to it, you should try my aunt's velvet cheesecake. She says it pairs well with confessions." The young man gave a dark chuckle, lifted the cup in salute, and left. Angie watched him go, hoping he could find a way to fix things, but only if he were sincerely sorry. She couldn't imagine having a boyfriend tell her they were done and then coming back to claim, "Just kidding." Fresh heartbreak had its own special cruelty. The disbelief of it, the way you kept reaching for something that was no longer there, she knew that one well enough. At least this young man still had the chance to fix it. The bell chimed again, and a woman in her 40s stepped in, purposeful and tight-lipped. She ordered a lemon bar, then hesitated, "To go," she added, already reaching for her wallet. Angie boxed the bar and slid it across the counter. As the woman turned to leave, she paused with her hand on the door. Her gaze went distant for a moment, and she said quietly, "Some things just don't work out." Then she pushed outside. Okay, that was random. For a fleeting second, Angie wondered if that voice could belong to the forget-me-not writer. Then she dismissed it. The words in the confession hadn't sounded finished. This woman seemed resolved, and her remark could be about a myriad of things. Angie headed back to the kitchen. "Do you ever have folks give you follow-ups to their confessions out loud?" Cora looked up from the cream puffs she was filling. "Sometimes. Why?" Angie explained. "Oh, that could be anyone," Cora said. "People come in here preoccupied and start talking like I'm meant to understand what's rattling around in their heads." She gave Angie a knowing look. "You're still fretting about the one with the flower, aren't you? I noticed you tucked it by the register." Angie jutted her chin. "You know I've always been inquisitive." Cora bent her head to look over her glasses and warned, "Curiosity killed the cat." "But satisfaction brought him back." Grinning, Angie kissed her aunt's cheek and returned to the counter. She tried to picture herself voicing her own thoughts aloud like that. Normally she wouldn't. But right after the accident, her stomach tightened. Maybe she had said random things to people, too. "We'll need to go through the confession box early this week," Cora said as she scooted toward the small dining area. "There are always a ton more on the Monday after graduation weekend." She nodded at the box at the end of the counter, its carved wisteria vines catching the light. Angie understood how this worked. It was a lot like the news cycle. Cora sorted the notes once a week, deciding which were read, which were answered, and which were quietly forgotten. The blue regret note had a limited shelf life. Thinking of the Black Coffee Boys' regret, Angie felt a little sorry for them all. Uncle Rod had loved quoting Falstaff, "The better part of valor is discretion." Inhibitions could be a kindness, especially when they kept you from saying something you would later wish back. She turned as another customer approached. "You're new here," she said. "That's Angie," Cora called, "my niece. She's helping me out. Angie, this is Brianna. She works in the library." "My aunt made her condition sound dramatic," Angie said with a grin. "I imagined fainting spells and heroic tea service." Brianna laughed and shook Angie's hand. "It's nice to finally meet you. Your aunt has talked about you a lot." At the twinge of guilt, Angie resisted the urge to flinch. The last time she'd visited, Uncle Rod was still alive. She couldn't change that, but she could be here now. "Are you here for long?" Brianna asked. Angie hesitated. "I'm at a bit of a crossroads. No real plan yet." "Well, the library has lots of events planned this summer. We're always looking for volunteers." Brianna smiled, then paused to look out the window, something a lot like dread flickering across her face. Then she thanked Cora and left. Angie watched her go, tucking away Brianna's suggestion to consider later. Outside, the young woman paused, glanced to the right, then abruptly spun toward the community center, nearly dropping her box of cookies. Angie scanned the street. She recognized only Gil, from the paper, and Mitch among a group of men chatting outside a business. Maybe Brianna had simply forgotten something. "You should take her up on that library offer," Cora said. "You would get to know people for more than it takes to pour a cup of coffee." "I might," Angie mused, "though I'm used to seniors." Cora gave her a flat look. Angie chuckled. "Former senior center program director here, and I have 2 words," she added. "Food fights." Cora chortled and Angie joined her. It felt so good to laugh again. Chapter 5. The law office smelled a little like old paper and leather, but mixed in with the scent of new carpet and paint. Evidently, Mr. Feldman had recently remodeled his office. Except for the furniture, since Rich sat in a vinyl chair that had probably been purchased when shag carpet was still in style. Mr. Feldman stacked the paperwork into a neat pile. The business your father left you is an asset, and not only the building, truck, tools, and client list. Rich nodded, still unsure what to do. He wasn't sure he wanted to return to Boston. If he did, he would need to find a new job, which was fine, since the buildings he'd designed there weren't the kind he preferred. But he didn't wish to work as a handyman for the rest of his life either. "So, what are my choices for the business?" he asked. "Well," Feldman slid one paper forward that contained a list of assets. "You can sell it in its entirety or in parts. The client list alone would be useful to a contractor. There's the option to liquidate everything else, sell the truck, the tools, the remaining contracts. You are able to make a clean break." The attorney pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Or you have the option to expand. You're a licensed architect in both Massachusetts and Wisconsin. While Wisteria isn't a large town, there is a great deal of growth going on around us. You could turn your father's business into a design and build firm and do projects such as residential remodels and historic reservations. Wisteria has a lot of that." "That sounds expensive." "It is. However, it would also be an investment," Feldman said. "You wouldn't need to do it all at once. Perhaps begin by offering services that draw on your training. Things like feasibility studies for renovations, code compliance reviews, space planning, and the like." The attorney leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "Your father was my first client when I moved to Wisteria, and I considered him my friend. He was proud of you and what you've accomplished. Never would he want you to sacrifice your dreams to carry on his business. You mentioned your dissatisfaction with the work you did in Boston. Maybe the foremost question you should answer for yourself is whether you even want to stay here. If you don't, there's your answer. After that, the only decision is how best to close out the company." Rich let out a long breath. When he'd come back to care for his dad after the first stroke, he thought it was temporary. He had enjoyed helping to keep the business going and spending those last days with Dad. But now, with his father gone, it felt like Rick was wasting his education and talent by doing only minor projects. "There's no rush, my boy, so take whatever time you need," Feldman added. "Your father built something useful, and from the comments I've heard around town, you've increased the number of clients. You won't starve while you decide. What you have are choices and not obligations." "Thanks." Rich stood. "You've given me much to consider." They shook hands, and he stepped outside where the warm air felt easier to breathe. He had research to do, but the attorney was right. No rush. Rich glanced down the street at Petals Confessions. He usually checked in on Cora a few times a week anyway, but he wanted to confirm the window repair had held. Plus, he didn't mind seeing Angie again. She stood at the counter, her sleeves pushed up, laughing at something Cora had said as they perused the Wisteria Gazette with Mr. Redding. "What am I missing?" Rich asked as he entered the café. "Miss Minerva," Angie said, scooting over so he could see the paper. "Dear Miss Minerva, I went on a blind date set up by a mutual friend. It started well. We had a lot in common. The conversation flowed and it felt easy. When the bill came, I assumed we would split it. Instead, he handed it to me and asked if I would mind paying. He didn't offer to get the next one or explain why. I was surprised, but it wasn't a significant amount, and I make good money, so I agreed. Then he put on a huge grin and told me I had passed the test and proved I wasn't a gold digger. I couldn't believe what he said. I snatched the bill out of his hand, told him it was a jerk move to test someone he had just met, and I walked out. Now he's telling our mutual friend that I owe him an apology. Looking back, I wonder if I overreacted. I have no wish to date him again, but I also don't want to be unkind. How do I apologize for my reaction without excusing his behavior? Signed, Still Thinking About It. Not good, Rich said, trying to think who the guy might be. Not classy at all, Angie agreed. Dear Still Thinking, you were startled, and that's when people say things they might not otherwise. Being told it was a test is insulting. You sound like a nice girl. If apologizing lets you sleep at night, do so. But you don't owe him one for objecting to being evaluated as a job applicant. You might suggest that if he is screening for generosity, he should try showing some first. Also, anyone who brings a test to coffee should not be surprised when they get burned. Yours plainly, Miss Minerva. Rich burst out laughing. I would love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. Do you think she will apologize? Mr. Redding asked, taking back the paper. I wouldn't, Angie said. I'd give the message to their mutual friend and let him decide if he wanted to pass it on. In my experience, people who behave badly just double down on their excuses. She should just count it as a close call. Rich wondered who had behaved badly in Angie's life, but he didn't ask. Someday they might reach their old level of closeness, but they weren't there yet. How's that window repair holding up? He asked. Great, as you know, since you fixed it. Cora glanced at him over her reading glasses. Wasn't today your meeting with Howie? Who? Angie asked. Howard Feldman, Family Law, Mr. Redding said, standing. I had him update my will earlier this year, since my most recent one still had our children as minors. He's good, Rich. You can trust him. And with that, he took his paper and left the café. Cora watched Rich, her expression the most neutral he could remember seeing it. He had spoken to her about his mixed feelings. Evidently, she didn't want to influence him. His gaze darted to Angie, then he forced himself to look down. He told himself that whether she stayed in Wisteria shouldn't have anything to do with the decision before him. If you're here to fix something else, fix your posture, Cora teased, breaking the awkward moment with a twinkle in her eyes. You look like a question mark. Rich grunted. That's about how I felt after I left Mr. Feldman's office. And she brushed a hand over her head as if she'd missed something. I'm still a question mark. Cora chuckled. We're just saying he has decisions to make and he's not ready yet. Angie blinked, then said, I get it. You're a transitional punctuation mark. Pretty much. Rich gave Angie's shoulder a playful nudge and said, I've missed your ability to state things that sound comforting and vaguely academic. What can I say? She held up both hands, her palms up. It's a gift I got from my parents and my aunt. Some customers entered, so Rich waved to the two women and left. By the time he drove up his street, his stomach was growling for dinner, but he wanted to check in on Jonas first. His house sat back from the street, half hidden behind hedges since he'd let them grow a little wild. How ironic. When Rich graduated from college, he had left Wisteria behind. All these years later, he couldn't decide whether he should stay or go, while Jonas, who had chosen to return, was now determined to abandon it all. Would that be what Rich was doing if he left? Trying to respect his friend's wish for others not to know he had returned, Rich parked 2 houses down and strolled casually, like a neighbor and absolutely not sneaking into Jonas's backyard. Rich stopped to admire a bird that did not exist, bent down to tie a shoe that was already tied, then slipped between the hedges and into the gate. Through the back window, he could see Jonas in the kitchen, surrounded by boxes. Rich tapped on the glass. Jonas looked up, his face flashing with recognition and resignation. He stood and came to unlock the door. "Come in." "How's the packing coming?" Rich asked once again. Jonas snorted. Rich scanned the room. There were 3 boxes, 2 labeled Keep and Donate, while a large black garbage bag must be for the trash. "That bad, huh? I should have gone through everything when my folks moved to Florida and gave me the house." Jonas rubbed his exhausted face. "Do you have any idea what it's like to go through 50 years' worth of someone else's stuff?" "Yeah, actually I do," Rich said, his voice low, as he remembered his father's attic he hadn't even tried to sort through yet. "Hey, man, I'm so sorry." Rich put a hand on his shoulder. "It's all good. What's the 3rd box for?" "That's the one that's taking all the time," Jonas said. "Sentimental things?" "Yes. No." Jonas pulled a face. "Yeah, I guess." Rich picked up a novel that had fallen and flipped it open. An envelope slid out and it fell to the floor, a delicate pressed flower peeking out. Jonas picked it up, carefully sliding the petal inside. He then took back the book and gently put the envelope inside. "This looks like an overwhelming project. Can I help?" Rich offered. Jonas hesitated. "You can work on the kitchen stuff." "Okay." They worked quietly for a while, the sound of tape and cardboard filling the space between them. "You don't have to leave," Rich said finally. Jonas continued taping a box. "Yes, I do." Rich looked up. "Why?" Jonas didn't answer and wouldn't meet his gaze. After a moment, Rich said, "I was thinking of bringing pizza over tomorrow night." Jonas glanced at him. "Why?" Rich decided to speak plainly. "Because you're isolating and it's not healthy." Jonas gave a weak smile. "You've turned very bossy." "That's what I get for hanging around Angie. She's rubbing off on me again." That earned him a genuine laugh. More importantly, Jonas didn't tell Rich not to bring pizza. Chapter 6. By the time Angie reached the community lawn with 2 cardboard dessert boxes, she remembered something about Wisteria. The town loved parties. So even simple gatherings like a teddy bear picnic to kick off the library's summer reading challenge turned into an event. She scanned the excited children and took a deep breath, hoping she was up to this. Cora was right that their joy was contagious, but it was also a blade. A year ago, she had stood in a park, just like this one, JJ's little hand, a warm, sticky weight in hers. His other hand had been grasping his battered elephant. Angie's eyes burned. Boo. JJ had named him Boo, with his youthful practicality, because an elephant, even a toy, could chase away the monster in the closet. Her son had vibrated with the full-body excitement only a 3-year-old could achieve over the promise of cookies and a story in the park. John had stood right behind them, his hand on the small of her back, leaning down to murmur something ridiculous in her ear, just to make her laugh. Angie had laughed. Now she couldn't remember what he'd said, only that she had pulled away in mock exasperation and told him to behave himself. She would give anything to take that moment back, to step into his teasing rather than chiding him about it. The knot in her throat tightened until it ached. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm, a small, sharp point to focus on, and commanded herself not to cry in front of a lawn full of children clutching stuffed animals. Angie couldn't do it. She would drop off Cora's cookies and then leave. "Oh, I'm so glad you came," Brianna called, sweeping over to give Angie a quick hug. The librarian's genuine happiness pushed down the grief enough to keep Angie there. She blinked the last of the moisture away and nodded toward the children. "Is it supposed to look like this?" she asked. "Like chaos pretending to be adorable? Yes. They're better once we get them together." Brianna's expression reminded Angie of a doting parent. She nodded at the 2 boxes she held. "Cora and I worked last night to get these teddy bear cookies decorated. Where shall I put them?" "Right over here." Brianna led her to a large table where other volunteers were putting out the treats. Cora included some for the kids with allergies. Angie lifted the lid of one box and pointed to the bag. "We included the list of ingredients." "We can always count on Cora for that." Brianna's phone pinged. "It's time to begin. Can you help finish unpacking the free books? We got nice donations from local businesses." And she was gone. Angie introduced herself to the group of people, noting which of the younger women wore wedding rings. Last night, Cora had said again that searching for the writer of the forget-me-not note was like looking for a needle in a haystack. She might be right, but the mystery gave Angie something else to think about. The event turned out to be equal parts charming and mildly unhinged. It took a bit to get them to settle down, but the mature woman who read aloud the first book had a gift for getting the attention of the children, even the littlest ones with the shortest attention spans. The stuffed toys they held, not all teddy bears, ranged from new purchases to family heirlooms that sometimes looked like they'd been attacked by a raccoon. "Isn't she talented?" Brianna whispered, coming to stand beside Angie. "She's our most requested reader and even teaches classes to others on how to grab their attention." "We could have used someone like her back in Seattle," Angie murmured. "Before I left, we were trying to get our seniors more involved with the library's children's programs." "You volunteered at your library?" "I ran the local senior center." Angie chuckled. "Sometimes they're not all that different from the little ones when they get fired up." Brianna blinked. "How so?" "Inappropriate humor?" "No." "Yes." "That's terrible." Brianna choked back a laugh. "You have no idea," Angie said dryly, "and they tend to behave themselves when there are little ones around." The reader finished the story then. As everyone applauded, Brianna returned to her responsibilities. Across the street, a group of men stood near a storefront. Angie didn't recognize any of them but Mitch. When Rich had explained about the man's injury, she felt bad about her gaffe, and she hoped to apologize someday. But that might make it worse. She was debating with herself about approaching him when she noticed he was staring at someone at the picnic. Angie realized it was Brianna, in time to see the librarian register his attention. Her body stiffened, her jaw muscles tightening. Then she bent over to answer a child's question. Angie moved strategically, so she blocked the former football player's view of the young woman, and said, "Hey, Brianna, I need your help with something." She straightened, keeping her gaze away from the direction of the men. "Sure." They walked together toward the table with the gift books. Before Angie could ask about Mitch, a woman approached with 2 young boys trailing behind her. She peered at Angie, but then recognition showed. The mother's face went pale, and then a bright pink. She ducked her head, spun around, and urged her children away. "Well, that was odd," Brianna muttered. "Not really," Angie sighed. Brianna took her arm so they faced each other and hissed, "Tell me." "She's part of Rich's history." "And yours, too, from the sound of it." Brianna tapped her chin. There's a story that circulated around town that I only now realize was about you." Angie winced. "Yes?" Brianna's eyes narrowed, her expression both accusing and approving. "About how you hauled Rich's cheating girlfriend across town to confess her sin to him?" "I couldn't get away with it now." Angie tried to look nonchalant, but a chuckle burst out. "I'm sure Chief Rogers would arrest me." "Oh, my word!" Brianna covered her mouth to hide her laughter. "So it's not an urban legend?" "Nope. But someday I hope she lets me get close enough to her to apologize." How funny that Angie had become part of a Wisteria urban legend. Movement drew her attention back to the men across the street, whose discussion must have ended. Mitch gave Brianna one more intense look, one Angie was glad the librarian wasn't looking in the direction to see. Rich crossed the lawn from the direction of the side street, pleased to be assisting with the teddy bear picnic. He hadn't been in town for it in years, and it was one of many events his father had loved to support. Knowing that Angie had volunteered to help too had nothing to do with it. That was what he kept telling himself anyway. Not that it mattered. From the pain she couldn't completely hide, it would take a long time for her to heal. And Boston, if he returned there, was very far from her home in Seattle. Rich had helped construct the low stage where Mrs. Kruger sat reading a book. He couldn't help but grin, since she had been one of his elementary school teachers and didn't look like she'd aged a day. Children sat cross-legged on blankets before her, clutching stuffed toys of every shape and level of wear. Off to the side were the refreshment tables. Angie was setting out some individually wrapped cookies from boxes with the Petals Confessions logo. He tried to remember who, besides him, Jonas, and their club of friends, she had chummed with during her summers here. Regardless, if she hadn't been friends with the other volunteers, Angie did well at socializing and making new ones. Rich couldn't help but feel a touch of pride on her behalf. At the sound of his name, Rich shifted his attention to the middle-aged woman behind him. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson." "Mrs. Kruger is very good at this, but my entire family came here today to hear Jonas Christensen." The woman sighed. "I could listen to him narrate my tax forms." "Didn't you hear?" Mr. Redding said, stepping beside her. "I was just talking to Susan Lyle, the theater owner. She said Jonas isn't only taking the summer off, but he quit. Someone else mentioned they'd heard he was applying for teaching jobs out of state." The older man looked to Rich as though for confirmation. Word sure got around Wisteria quickly. He didn't know about any of that, but he had promised his friend to say nothing, so Rich just shrugged. "Well, that is terrible news," Mrs. Johnson declared, her expression pinched. "We must find out how to contact him and convince him to remain." She waved to another woman and rushed away. "Anything about it in Miss Minerva's column?" Rich asked, hoping to distract Mr. Redding from asking too much. "Perhaps someone should send the newspaper a letter about it. Maybe she could figure out how to get Jonas to stay. It might even help you decide the same thing." The older man tapped his folded newspaper on Rich's arm before heading to the refreshment table. His gaze drifted to Angie again to find her talking with Brianna. They seemed to know each other well, which was good, since she had firm roots in the community. Though she hadn't run with his and Angie's summer group, the librarian would be a good friend. He shook his head. What right did he have to worry about Angie making friends? Then Brianna stiffened at something across the street. Rich followed her line of sight to Mitch. While he stood in a group of men, his gaze kept returning to Brianna. Interesting. Rich turned his focus back to her. Brianna had spotted Rich looking at her. She shifted abruptly, just enough to turn her back toward her old high school sweetheart. Rich almost laughed. She had quite literally given Mitch the cold shoulder. Good for her if she wasn't interested in his attention. It appeared that having a football career hadn't humbled the guy. Rich's chest tightened a little in concern. Mitch had been possessive in high school. Would he think he could waltz back into town after all these years and expect Brianna to welcome his interest? Rich didn't want to put his nose into her business, but he'd seen enough guys who thought they were a gift to women and felt entitled toward them. He'd heard Brianna's family had moved to Florida a few years ago, and her sister lived in Houston. She was here alone. Did she have someone to turn to if Mitch became a problem? Across the lawn, Angie came around the table to stand by Brianna and said something. Maybe he should mention his concerns to Angie, and she could say something. Chapter 7. When the bell over the café door rang, it sounded muted, much like Angie's mood. The stormy weather had increased the humidity and made everything feel heavy, even breathing. After so long in Seattle, she hadn't remembered how much worse a simple 10 degrees in temperature could do to the density in the air. Brianna shook her umbrella before coming in. "I wish I'd remembered mine." Angie pointed to her still damp ponytail. Brianna gave a sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry, but didn't you used to live in Oregon?" "I'll call it selective amnesia," Angie admitted. "In all my childhood memories of this place, the sun was shining." "If you remember nothing else, remember to carry a collapsible umbrella in your purse," Brianna said, scanning the day's menu option. "If it's any consolation, we have the most rain in June, and you likely missed a lot of it." "Well, that's some consolation." Angie poured Brianna's regular tea order before she asked, "How's your day going?" "Long. Actually, everything is long today." Brianna gave a humorless chuckle. "Does that sound too melodramatic?" "Oh, no," Angie said sympathetically. "Some days are just like that. Is it work?" Brianna heaved an enormous sigh. "It's just been a rough few weeks." "Does it have anything to do with that guy Mitch?" Angie asked, thinking about how he had watched the librarian. "That man!" Something wild flashed in Brianna's eyes. "He's driving me crazy." "Tell us about it," Cora said, scooting to the counter. She pointed to a table. "There's a lull, so we have a few minutes. And I'm ready for a break anyway. Angie, get us some cheesecake." When her aunt turned bossy like that, no one could resist. So Angie did as she was told. She quickly plated 3 slices of velvet cheesecake, added forks, and carried them to the small round table near the window. It was not until Brianna had taken a bite of her food that Cora spoke. "All right, tell us what that man has done now." Brianna finished chewing, then let out a breath that was part groan, part laugh. "He makes me feel like I'm in the middle of a rom-com, except I'm not laughing." "I'm intrigued. What's he doing?" Angie asked, arching a brow. "He shows up wherever I am." Brianna glanced over her shoulder and searched the street outside the window. "It's not like he's following me exactly. He often doesn't even speak to me. But I've seen him at the library and the grocery store. Once he was standing outside my apartment building with a cup of coffee. That time he said I always did like to be chased. And yesterday, when he walked past me in the store, he leaned closer and mumbled something about me playing hard to get. As if." Brianna put down her fork. For a moment, none of them spoke. "I don't want him. Not now. Not ever." She sighed. "I just wish he would believe me when I say so." A movie character flashed through Angie's mind, and she covered her mouth to keep from laughing, since this was no laughing matter. "What?" Brianna asked, her tone a touch sullen. "It's not you. I know Mitch looks nothing like Mr. Collins when he declares Elizabeth is turning him down because that's what well-bred ladies do." Angie giggled. "But it's the same mentality, and both are ridiculous." Cora choked on her tea, and Brianna burst out laughing. From Pride and Prejudice? They spent the next few minutes discussing the ridiculousness of the Jane Austen character, helping to lighten the mood. Brianna turned serious again, chewing on the last bite of her cheesecake. She set down her fork. "You know what the worst part is?" she asked, her voice soft. "Everyone who sees him hanging around says I should be flattered by his attention." Cora's mouth tightened. "There's a difference between being admired and being circled." "Thank you. They don't see it that way, though, saying he's a glorious prize because he used to be a famous football player." Brianna's eyes turned hooded. "Some of the old biddies say I'm getting a little long in the tooth and should be grateful." "But you're not," Angie declared. "No, he was a terrible boyfriend in high school." Brianna met her gaze. "I was relieved when he left." Cora tilted her head. "Maybe I'm selfish, but a girl wants to be more than a pretty face her guy likes to show off in public. Everything was always about him and his football career. He wasn't very nice when we were alone." Angie and Cora stiffened, but Brianna waved them off. "Oh, he never yelled at me or hit me. To be honest, he hardly noticed me at all. It was only when we were in public that I ever got any attention, and that was just for the audience." She shook her head. "Believe it or not, when he dumped me after going to college, some people brought me casseroles, like you do when someone dies. They assumed I was heartbroken." "But you were relieved," Angie murmured. "So relieved," Brianna agreed. "I was free for the first time since I was 15. And now he's back, acting like I've been waiting for him all these years. Like I never had a life without him." Something resembling misery flashed in her eyes, but she dropped her gaze and folded her napkin. Angie tried to imagine things Brianna could do to shut the guy down, but didn't know Mitch well enough. Maybe Rich would have some ideas. "He asked me last week if I still had the necklace he gave me, and said he always liked to see me wearing his things." Brianna touched her bare neck. "I just want him to leave me alone." "And not have the town turn against you," Angie said. Brianna gave a glum nod. Cora reached across the table and patted her hand. "Let us put our heads together and see what we can come up with." She waggled her eyebrows. "There are benefits to being friends with crafty old ladies." "Thank you for believing me." Brianna's eyes glistened. The bell over the door jingled as a little boy came in with his tired mother, holding a damp plush dinosaur by one foot and leaving a faint wet trail across the floor. Angie quickly gathered the plates. "I need to get back to work." Angie gave them a quick hug. "Thank you again." "Hi, Miss Ward," the young boy said to her. "Looks like you need a bag for your dino, Levi. You don't want him to catch a cold." Brianna glanced back at Angie and winked before picking up her umbrella and stepping outside. Taking the hint, Angie grabbed a bag large enough for the toy and held it out for him. The little guy dropped his stuffed toy inside, and she returned it to him. When he giggled and hugged it fiercely to himself, her eyes stung. JJ had hugged Boo exactly like that. With a tremulous smile, she stepped back to the counter and took her mother's order. Mr. Redding held the door open for her as the two exited, and then he went straight to where Cora sat. Angie took care of the dishes. She glanced down at the blue envelope poking out from under the register. So, she had 2 women she hoped to help. Chapter 8. By noon, Rich had fixed a leaking toilet, painted a front door, installed a new dishwasher, put in 3 bids for small remodeling projects, and weighed options for expanding his father's business. Rich's business. Over the last few days, he had done a lot of research, and he concluded that Mr. Feldman was right. If Rich wanted to, he could stay in Wisteria and work as an architect. Mostly. He set his drill on the grass beside Mayor Woolward's front steps and pressed the new board into place, lining the grain with the existing wood so it would weather evenly. She hovered behind him, clutching a mug of tea as if it were a talisman. "You always make it look easy," she said. "Your dad taught you well." "When I was a kid, I didn't appreciate him making me do the work, but I'm glad now for the skills." Rich chuckled. "You might be surprised how many people in my architectural classes had no first-hand building experience at all." "Oh, dear. Well, thank you for coming so quickly. I did not want Mother to trip over the board. She's unsteady on her feet, but refuses to use a cane." Mayor Woolward shook his hand, sliding in a bill as she did. "You already wrote me a check." He tried to return the $10 bill. The mayor stepped back. "Use it for lunch. You should go see Cora's cute niece at the café. If I remember correctly, you and she used to be as thick as thieves when you were children." It wasn't an order, and yet it was. The mayor had once been his principal at school and had a forceful personality. When she handed a guy a suggestion, he would be wise to take it. She gave him a sly grin. "That's a good boy. And now I have to get back to the office." Mayor Woolward spun and went into her house. He would be 30 in a couple of years, yet she continued to think of him as a boy. Rich's stomach growled, so he gathered his equipment and headed for Petals Confessions. He must have caught the after-lunch crowd. Since Cora only sold desserts, people often got fast food and then came there for something sweet. It was also a great place to bring a date. Angie looked up from the customer whose order she was taking and met his gaze. Her eyes lit up and she smiled. Man, but it took him back to those summer days. Only in seeing her again did he understand what an integral part she had been of his happiness then. Since no one came in after Rich, when he reached the counter, he asked, "Are you ready for a break?" He held up the bill Mayor Woolward had given him. "I got a tip, and I want to splurge." "Sure. Black as usual?" Angie asked. "And one of those gooey goodness bars." "The what?" "He means my magic bar," Cora called from the kitchen. Angie gave a soft laugh. "That's actually a good name for them. I call them the 7 layers of addiction. I can feel my jeans getting tighter every time I eat one." He had to stop himself from leaning over the counter to look at her hips, but she must have seen something that gave him away. "Don't you dare say a word, Rich Young. I have enough trouble with this mom bot as it is." Something flashed in her eyes and then was gone as she retrieved the largest bar left and put it on a plate. He kept his mouth shut, curious. He had never given any thought to what it must mean to carry the physical evidence of a child who was gone, whether the change was something a woman wanted to be rid of or needed to hold on to. He sure didn't know enough to guess. But he liked her mom bod, though he doubted she wanted to hear that. "I made this batch," she said proudly. "I can't wait to try it." After he settled the bill, she added, "I see you brought your lunch. Go get started, and I'll bring your coffee." By the time she settled into the chair across from him, he'd put her burger on her side of the table and spread the fries on a napkin for them to share. "You remembered," she cried happily when she lifted the bun to show the roasted poblano pepper on top of her burger. "I haven't had one of these in years. Thank you." Angie surprised him by leaning over to kiss his cheek before taking a bite of her sandwich. And they said the way to a man's heart was through his stomach. Rich felt almost smug as they chatted like the old friends they were. Brianna walked past and waved at them, likely on her way back to work. Since he couldn't stay long, he and Angie quickly finished their food. "That was so good. Thanks again," Angie called as she hurried to wash up while he gathered the trash. Rich paused at the door to glance back, but he found Cora watching him again. Her gaze wasn't standoffish, but neither was it friendly. It was more assessing, if that was even the right description. It unsettled him. He lifted his hand in a weak wave and left. What was that about? Maybe that was what made him notice Mitch. He stood in front of the town hall entrance next door, as if searching for someone. Glancing to the side, he noticed Rich and startled. Looking embarrassed, Mitch turned and headed in the other direction. Shaking his head, Rich headed for his truck. Whenever people acted strangely, he wondered if there was a full moon. Across town, his next stop was the old Meyer place, where a couple from Madison wanted to turn the attic into a studio. It was a large enough project that they might need to hire a general contractor to do it for them. Rich sketched on his notepad while they talked about load paths and window angles. "You should do this," the woman said, tapping his drawing with interest. "Design things." "I'm actually an architect." Rich smiled. "I'm just not sure there's enough business in Wisteria for me to do just that." Later he stopped at the lumber yard to pick up trim for a small restoration project. The man behind the counter asked if Rich could look at his shop expansion next month. Another project too large for his handyman's license. "I'll have to think about it." Rich wondered if he should get his contractor's license. But then, what about his architectural degree? The sun was on the horizon by the time he parked a couple of houses down the street from Jonas's place. Out of habit now, he made his usual approach, pretending to check his phone, stopping to adjust a shoe that didn't need it, and darting into the bushes before slipping through the side gate. Jonas sat in the living room this time, surrounded by fresh boxes. "Hey," Rich said quietly. Jonas gave a small smile. "You didn't need to come." "I wanted to." Rich set his friend's favorite pizza on the table. "Do you have much more to do?" "Not a lot. I'm selling the furniture to one of those wholesale places," Jonas said, taking a slice. "The ones who do estate sales. They'll come to collect it once I'm gone." Rich chose some pizza, scanning the room. He remembered the times they had spent in it, playing games with the Christensens. "Is there nothing here you would like to keep?" Rich asked. "Even just for sentimental reasons?" "There's nothing in this town I want memories of." The bitterness in Jonas's voice was so thick it was caustic. "You want to talk about it?" Rich asked softly. "Let's just say that if I'm going to have any kind of future, it won't be in Wisteria." Rich wiped his hands and picked up a framed photograph from the top of a box. It showed Jonas and a group of kids in costume, all grinning under stage lights. "Things didn't work out at the theater?" Rich rubbed his chin. "Lots of people were talking about you at the teddy bear picnic. You usually love that." "Yeah, I used to." The past tense landed hard. Rich wished his friend would open up. "You still have friends here." "Do I?" Jonas asked, his laugh quiet and brittle. "Of course you do." "Look, I don't intend to be the sad guy people tiptoe around," Jonas growled, "and I won't be someone's unfinished business." "So you're just going to disappear?" Rich asked. Jonas met his gaze. "Pretty much." He sealed the box with a strip of tape and pressed it flat, smoothing it twice before setting it aside. The sound of it had a sense of finality that made Rich edgy. He'd learned the hard way that once Jonas moved like this, stopping him was never simple. "All right, then." Rich had to figure out what had happened, but he obviously wouldn't get the details directly. Jonas blinked. "All right?" "For now." Rich grinned. "But I'm still bringing Chinese tomorrow." Jonas gave a soft snort. "You are relentless." "That's how friends are." Jonas watched him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." Rich clapped him on the shoulder. Mongolian beef, right?" His friend was chuckling softly as Rich slipped out the door again. Chapter 9. Angie followed Brianna into the prep area, tucked in a nook under the stairs. It was a clever use of space, and reminded Angie of a secret room in a storybook. The air smelled faintly of warm plastic from the laminator and fake flowers from the library's perpetually overworked air freshener. It was an odd combination, but not unpleasant. A bit like Wisteria itself, layered and a tad unexpected, but in the best way. "How does this quest work?" she asked. "We want to expose the children to different books in their areas of interest," Brianna said, pulling out some cardstock. "Without them realizing that's what you're doing," Angie nodded. "I like it. Getting them to have fun while trying something new. The folks I worked with at the senior center back home sometimes cottoned on to my distraction efforts, but most of them would acknowledge it in good humor." "I'm really glad you agreed to help with this," Brianna said, her eyes bright. "My aunt is right that I need to get out more," Angie admitted. She understood what Cora hadn't said, that the cafe was a bit of a nest, cozy and familiar, until it became a cage. Had that happened to her aunt after Uncle Rod died? If so, how had she freed herself? "Here's what I'm planning for the quest." Brianna pulled a notebook closer and flipped to a page labeled Quest Map in tidy block letters. "We make it a hunt for the lost bolt. Each lightning bolt card has a clue on the back that will point them toward books that might not be as well known." "Huh," Angie said. "So it's like exposing a kid who only reads graphic novels to fantasy, or guiding someone who's only read sports stories toward a mystery. How do you know what they like?" "They, or more likely their parents, filled out a simple questionnaire when they signed up." Brianna tapped her pen against her lip. "Each bolt card will have a clue to a book. Once they find it, they read." "The entire book?" Angie thought that would discourage some children. "Heavens, no. Only a paragraph or two. Hopefully enough to get them interested in the story." Brianna gave a resigned sigh and pointed to a poster. "But we need to bribe them to take part. Book Wizard Quest Checkpoint. Story seekers welcome. Find a story, earn a treasure." "I think this is brilliant," Angie said. "You call it bribery. I would suggest that incentive is a better word choice, and we all need that. Cora said she signed up as a sponsor. Is this what she's talking about?" "Yes." Brianna looked relieved. "What we'll work on today is assembling the quest passport. Dang, someone else used the rest of my cardstock. Here, you can pop these lightning bolts out while I fetch more from the supply room." She hurried out of the small room, her footsteps fading into the hush of the library. Angie went to work, carefully extracting the bolts. She found the repetitive motion soothing, though the mindless activity left her free to wonder what JJ would have thought of the activity. When grief threatened, Angie told herself to think about something else. Since she had finished with the bolts, she lifted the stack of clue cards. "To find your next bolt, seek a hero who starts quiet but becomes brave. Look for owls and a lad with a scar. Middle grade fantasy, shelf F." Angie smiled. "Clever." She picked up another one. "To locate your next bolt, seek a hero who looks small but thinks big. Look for clever questions, secret clues, and a boy who never misses a detail. Middle grade mystery, shelf M." 2 minutes passed, then 5 as she examined more of the cards. Angie listened, expecting Brianna's light tread, but all she heard was the distant murmur of a patron at the front desk, and the whisper of pages turning somewhere among the stacks. Had something delayed Brianna? Maybe she could use some help. Angie stepped out of the workroom and into the main aisle between the shelves. Because the library was in the basement of Town Hall, it always felt cooler than the main floor. Stepping lightly to avoid disturbing people, she scanned the aisles as she made her way to the supply closet. She passed the community history display with its framed photographs of old Wisteria, the black and white faces staring out at her. She wondered if Uncle Rod's family had anyone in it. At the end of the hall, the storage room stood ajar, and beside it, angled like a towering giant, stood Mitch Connolly. He wasn't exactly blocking the doorway, but there was no way even a smallish woman like Brianna could squeeze past him. She stood with her back to the shelves, clutching a pack of cardstock to her chest as a shield. Her composed face showed tension only in the tightness around her mouth, but especially in the way she held her shoulders. Mitch's voice carried low and confident, as if he were telling a joke he expected to land. "Come on, Bree," he said, his tone coaxing. "It's just coffee. Since when has that been a crime? I'm not some stranger off the street." Brianna's quiet reply had steel to it. "I said no." "You always were stubborn," Mitch said, shaking his head, his tone condescending. "But that's what I like about you. You make a guy work for it." When he stepped closer, Angie caught the tension in Brianna's shoulders. Angie couldn't stand there quietly when her new friend needed someone to run interference. So, where she'd been quiet before, now she practically stomped to announce her approach. "Hey, Brianna," Angie said, forcing a brightness into her tone she didn't feel. "I was wondering if the supply closet had swallowed you." "Sorry." Brianna's gaze darted to Angie, relief thick. "I was delayed." "I can see that." Angie kept her face neutral, but she let her disdain leak into her voice. "Mitch, isn't it?" His entire body radiated irritation as he turned to face her. She was usually good at reading people, but she couldn't decide if the sense of menace coming off him was simply his enormous size or his attitude. "Angie, isn't it?" he asked. "I didn't realize you worked here." "I'm a volunteer, and Brianna is my supervisor, who went missing." Mitch gave a soft grunt. "I was just talking to her." "So I heard." Angie crossed her arms and hitched her hip to the side, like she used to do with confrontational seniors who tried to buck the rules. And Brianna said no. "I wasn't talking to you." Mitch narrowed his eyes, and Angie couldn't help wondering what it must have been like on the football field to have someone like him come at you like that. "No," Angie agreed. "You weren't, but you weren't listening to her either." She shifted her body enough to make a path for Brianna to escape without making a scene. "Now, we have work to do. We don't want to disappoint the kids." Brianna blinked once, then slipped past Angie, who kept herself between them. Mitch's jaw tightened. "You're making this into something it isn't." "No, sir." Angie tipped her head, giving him a hard smile. "I'm making it exactly what it is." For a moment his gaze hardened, but then he put on the public mask she'd seen him use in the past. "Whatever," he muttered, pushing past her so his big muscular arm brushed hers. Angie stayed firmly in place until he disappeared, and then she let out her breath. "Oh, my word," Brianna breathed, still gripping the box, her knuckles white. "You don't have to put up with that," Angie said. "He dumped me years ago, but everyone acts like I owe him something." Brianna looked up, and for a second the careful librarian mask slipped, showing a hopelessness that seemed out of proportion. "Did he ever hurt you?" Angie asked softly. "No, but I've never had the nerve to stand up to him before, either." Brianna swallowed. "I keep telling myself if I ignore him long enough, he'll get bored. I just want him to leave me alone." Angie glanced down the hall in the direction Mitch had gone, her mind already working. She had learned a long time ago to face whatever frightened her or she would freeze, and she refused to give in. Then we stopped waiting for him to get bored and take action of our own. She glanced at her new friend. As long as you agree. What do you have in mind? Brianna asked, looking hopeful. Chapter 10. As had become his habit, Rich stepped into Petals Confessions for his mid-afternoon break. Cora sat with Mr. Redding in the corner, while Angie stood at the counter, looking contemplatively at a blue envelope. When she recognized Rich, she stuffed the note back inside and slid the envelope behind the register. A tinge of jealousy poked at him, but logic had him pushing it down as ridiculous. Besides Angie not being emotionally available yet, no man Rich knew would send notes to a woman using pale blue stationery. Was a friend or coworker back in Seattle trying to talk her into returning? But then why snail mail? He needed to get a grip. Anything wrong? Angie asked, watching him curiously as he just stared at her. Yes, but Rich couldn't tell her about his ridiculous crush or his efforts with Jonas. Just the usual balancing act, he said, which was true. Then Rich looked more closely at Angie and asked, What's upset you? She glanced at her aunt before leaning closer. I'm trying not to commit a felony. Whoa, what happened? The alarm in his voice got the attention of the other two. Angie stood with her lips pursed. Out with it, Cora commanded, while Mr. Redding leaned back in his chair with interest. Brianna asked me not to say anything about it, Angie said. Does it have anything to do with Mitch? Rich asked. Angie blinked. How do you know? I'm not blind, Rich said, his voice flat. That boy doesn't have a discreet bone in his body, Cora agreed. I've noticed how he watches her. Same here. Mr. Redding folded his newspaper they had been perusing together, and folks are talking about it. Poor Brianna, Angie muttered. He's shifted from just watching her, hasn't he? Rich asked. Angie explained the incident at the library. He didn't yell at her or touch her, but he's so big. He was absolutely looming over her and acted like she wasn't serious when she told him no. Rich clenched his fists. He had learned firsthand about it in college, when a girl in his study group had asked for his help with a man who wouldn't leave her alone. It had taught Rich to be aware of women around campus and in social situations. All a guy had to do was pay attention, because when women were uncomfortable, their body language said everything necessary. He kept telling her she was playing hard to get. Angie's jaw tightened. He only backed off when I stepped in, and he stormed away. It made me so mad, like we were the ones who were wrong. It reminded me of when someone gives you the bird after they cut you off. Well, I'm glad you stepped in, Cora declared, rising to grab her scooter again. And I thought it was only my generation, Mr. Redding mused, slowly standing. What do you mean? Angie asked. In my day, we were taught that if a woman told us no, we should simply up our game, to use a modern term. He glanced at Cora. Think of all the movies we grew up with. Pillow talk, she said with a nod. If you really want to go back, there's It Happened One Night, Mr. Redding added, and it won all 5 major Academy Awards. You're right. Angie frowned. The Notebook. Allie tells him she's engaged to someone else, but he shows up anyway. Rich rubbed his chin. Say anything. When they frowned at him, he clarified, everyone remembers the boombox scene, but no one talks about the fact that Diane already told Lloyd no. I'm sensitive to the issue, but I never considered how modern movies kind of set guys up with the wrong expectations. But how do we make Mitch see this? Exactly. If he's not a total troll, he'll still do it again because he thinks persistence is romantic. And she rubbed her forehead. I want to tell him off. Publicly. with witnesses." "I get it," Rich said, "but he wouldn't walk away thinking he's wrong, but that you're emotional and unreasonable." She scowled. "I'm not emotional." "You are, and rightly so," Rich added gently, "but he'll hear a threat." "Good point," Mr. Redding agreed. "As soon as people turn defensive, they stop listening and dig into their positions." "Well, we could always let Miss Minerva handle it," Cora mused. "Ah, I like it," Mr. Redding said, settling into his chair again. "Something I've always enjoyed about Minerva's column is that she has a knack for saying things people don't want to hear, but in a way that lets them pretend they reach that conclusion themselves." "You mean write to the paper about it?" Angie's eyes brightened, but then shuddered. "You're right that publicly humiliating him isn't a good way to change his mind about something." "Certainly. We would need to be subtle." Cora's eyes took on that gleeful twinkle that had always terrified Rich as a kid. "What are you thinking of?" he asked warily. "I'm not even sure Mitch would read her column." "Of course he would," Cora grinned, "especially if several people just mentioned it when he's around." Angie crinkled her brow. "As much as I would like to smack him silly, how do we do it the right way?" "It's simple enough," Cora said. "The letter should describe the situation, just enough for him to recognize it, but not be specific enough so it points a finger at him. Then we pray his conscience goes to work on him." "So it should make him sympathize with the woman." Mr. Redding grinned. "I've always thought Mitch Connolly was a good man at heart, but had been fawned over too much. That can make people feel special and entitled." "Brianna needs to be safe," Rich warned. "We don't want him coming after her, accusing her of trying to damage his reputation." "Right. I told her I would think about it and then warn her." Angie retrieved a notepad and a pen. "What do we say?" "It's all about making her situation sympathetic." Cora sat again, considering. "How about this?" For the next few minutes they all contributed to the draft until they agreed it was ready to send. "Dear Miss Minerva, I am at my wit's end and plead with you for help. A man I once dated is showing up wherever I am. He acts like it's a coincidence, and I might believe that, except I catch him watching me all the time. It's creepy and unsettling. Lately, it's gotten worse because he keeps asking me out. My mother always taught me to be nice, saying that if a boy had the courage to ask me out, I should respect him and agree to go out once. Except I don't want to date him again, so I told him no. He claims I'm just playing hard to get. That isn't true. I'm simply not interested in him like that. What terrifies me is that he refuses to hear me and acts like my boundaries are a challenge for him to break down. I've started changing my routine and avoiding places I love. I'm wondering whether I will need to quit my job and move somewhere else. I have no wish to make a scene or be cruel, but I also don't want to feel afraid in my own town. How does a woman hold her ground when a man confuses persistence with romance? His mother would be so disappointed in him." "That last bit will hit solid," Rich said. "He idolized his mother while she was alive, and he would do anything not to disappoint her." "His mother was a lovely woman," Cora agreed. As Angie folded the letter and slid it into the envelope, Rich realized that once it reached Miss Minerva, it would be out of their hands. He hoped they were doing the right thing. "I can drop it off at the post office on my way home," Mr. Redding offered. "Thank you." She handed it to him and then turned to Rich. "You never got your coffee." He pulled out his phone to check the time. "Yeah, I need to get going." Angie rushed to the counter and went to work pouring a to-go cup for him. "Thanks," he said, and left, hoping Miss Minerva could do her magic. Later that afternoon, as he was installing a ceiling fan, the mention of Brianna's name drew his attention. "That teddy bear picnic activity was so fun," Mrs. Lander said to a woman Rich didn't recognize. "Brianna does such a great job with the programming." "The rumor that she will get back with Mitch now he's returned to Wisteria doesn't ring true," the lady said. Rich looked up. "Why would she reconcile with him when she already has a boyfriend?" "Oh?" Mrs. Lander asked with interest. "Yes, I saw them a few times dining out, but not in Wisteria. Very cozy, if you know what I mean." The woman shot Mrs. Lander a knowing glance. "A handsome man, too. Not built like a freezer. No offense to Mitch, but I would never be interested in a man who was so large he towered over me like he does." "Yes, well," Mrs. Lander didn't look convinced, but they took their conversation to the kitchen. Huh, Brianna had a boyfriend? Why hadn't she enlisted his help to deal with Mitch? Chapter 11. Angie loaded a cheesecake into the display case. She was getting used to the schedule of the place, and appreciated it when the after-lunch dessert rush finally thinned, leaving behind a soft quiet. It was a hot one today, the air heavy with heat and moisture. She was ready for a nap. The bell over the café door gave its familiar ring, and Mr. Redding stepped in with a copy of the Gazette, followed by Rich. "Over here, Kirk," Aunt Cora called from the side table where she was resting her ankle. "Has it been published yet?" "Indeed it has." Mr. Redding raised a hand and waved for Angie to join them. Rich had already pulled out a chair for her, grinning. "Have you seen it already?" Angie asked, hurrying over, a little miffed that the men might have scanned it without them. "Have no fear, young lady," Mr. Redding assured her. "All we did was verify that the Gazette had run the letter. Come, and we will read the response together." Rich had pulled the chairs close so everyone could see the newspaper, so Angie slipped into the seat beside him. "You read it," Cora said, pushing the paper closer to Angie. She shook her head. "But you're better at reading the snark." Her aunt folded her arms and waited. "Fine," Angie said. "Dear Miss Minerva, I am at my wit's end and plead with you to help me." The Gazette had changed none of what they had written as a group, which was a pleasant surprise. Angie cleared her throat and was about to begin when the bell chimed and Brianna hurried in. Her attention went to the newspaper, and she brought her hand to her throat. "Already?" she breathed. "We were about to look at it together," Angie said. "Here." Rich stood and held his chair for Brianna. She sat in it, her hands clasped to her chest, and he took up position beside her. "Do you want to read it?" Angie asked. Her eyes wide, Brianna shook her head. "You do it." "All right, then." Dear Wit's End, you, my dear, are not required to return a man's interest simply because he offers it. Saying no, when done with kindness, does not make you cold. I've often thought it's nearly a miracle when two people connect, since we're all so different. But you get to decide where your heart lies, not someone else. Now, it's true that some ladies enjoy a little chase and do send mixed signals. If a woman says maybe, flirts freely, or invites pursuit, then a gentleman is not wrong to respond if he likes that sort of game. But you didn't describe that. This is why men must pay attention. No means no. Not try harder. Not convince me. Not eventually. Just no. Persistence may be charming in movies and storybooks. Gentlemen, let me tell you this. Han Solo and too many other fictional heroes has led you astray. Ignoring a woman's no is disrespectful at best and threatening at worst. Her no is a boundary you are not to cross. Romance should make you feel loved, not worn down. Yours plainly, Miss Minerva." When Angie finished, they sat in silence for a few seconds. "Do you think it will work?" Brianna asked. "We'll make sure he sees it," Rich said. "It's about as gentle as you can be while still calling someone out." "All we can do is the best we can do," Angie gave a soft laugh. "Sorry, that sounds lame, but it's true." "She got that from my mother," Cora noted with pride, "and it is true. Now we'll pray that the good man in Mitch has an epiphany." The bell jingled again, and the five of them turned, almost guiltily, to see who it was. Mitch Connolly. They all froze, but Brianna went rigid. He filled the doorway in the way he had, which made the little shop seem smaller. He looked very much the prosperous professional in his expensive business suit and impeccable grooming, except that his complexion was white. His gaze fell on Brianna instantly, and he said, "We have to talk." Brianna's mouth opened, then closed again, and she sent a panicked glance at Angie. "Not alone," Angie said simply. Mitch frowned, his eyes a myriad of emotions, from hurt to anger, and finally to resignation. But then he heaved out a breath. "I shouldn't laugh because that's fair." He met Brianna's gaze. "I owe you an apology." "This probably isn't the place," Rich said mildly. "I disagree. This is the perfect place, especially with Cora's niece here. You've read the paper, I'm sure," Mitch said, his jaw tight as he pointed to the newspaper. "We all know that didn't come out of nowhere." Brianna nodded. "Did you write it?" he asked. "No." Mitch's shoulders slumped, and he shifted his attention to Angie. Rich moved closer to her, but it was Mr. Redding who spoke. "We worked on it together, and Angie only told Brianna after I took it to the Gazette." The older man leaned back in his chair. "The entire situation has been enlightening for me. I am old school enough to understand the film reference." "Why don't you have a seat with us?" Cora suggested. "It looks like you have a lot on your mind." "I'll get everyone some coffee." Angie hurried to the kitchen. "Let me do that," Rich said from behind her. "I think this is going to need your aunt's velvet cheesecake." "Good answer." With them working jointly, it didn't take long to bring 2 trays over. The others had pulled tables together, so Angie served the plates of cheesecake while Rich unloaded the coffee cups. It was awkward at first, but Cora seemed to make Mitch less uncomfortable by asking how business was going. Finally, when everyone had finished their cheesecake, he looked at Brianna again. "I owe you an apology, a huge one." Mitch rubbed his neck. "I see now that I've been an entitled jerk to you, and I'm sorry. My mother would be disappointed in me, and I—" He cleared his throat, his coffee mug suddenly holding his full attention. I wanted to clear the path so you and I could get together again, so I dropped some insinuations to you." Mitch swallowed. "They weren't true, and I regret it." His phone rang, startling them all. He jumped to his feet, already pulling it from his pocket. "I have to get this." Mitch paused and looked at Brianna. "I really am sorry, and I won't bother you again." With that, he limped out of the café. "Well, what do you know?" Cora mused. Brianna didn't move right away. She kept her clenched hands in her lap as if she were waiting for something. Mr. Redding shot her a worried glance and rose to his feet. "I'm glad our letter helped. I'd best get home." He placed a bill on the table and left. "Are you okay?" Angie asked. "I would have expected you to be happy, but you look ill." Brianna just shook her head, her eyes glistening, as she put her plate and fork on the tray. Angie exchanged glances with Rich and Cora, but they both looked as confused as she felt. "That's my job," Angie said, putting another plate down. "Let me help, please?" Brianna asked, her voice barely a whisper. So they gathered the remains of the snack and brought them to the kitchen. As Brianna was returning to the dining area, she paused by the cash register. "What's this?" She pulled out the blue envelope, her face even paler than before. Then her cheeks flushed before blanching again. And Angie understood. "You wrote it, didn't you?" Brianna nodded slowly. She opened the envelope and withdrew the note. As she did, the dried flower fluttered to the floor. As the delicate petal flitted to the ground, something niggled in Rich's memory. He bent and carefully lifted it. Turning the pale, papery bloom with its faintly scalloped, flat edges, he wondered where he had seen it before. "What's the story?" he asked. Angie glanced at Brianna, but with her pale face and two bright eyes, it was obvious she couldn't speak. "She wrote a confession and put it in the box," Angie said. "I found it the day I arrived, and it really struck me." Rich studied the petal, searching his memory. He'd seen it in a box. Surely not in his dad's attic. There had been a pale blue envelope nearby and an old fantasy paperback, one from the Shannara series. "Jonas. Were you dating Jonas Christensen?" he asked Brianna. Her face crumpled, and it was as if a dam had broken open. She folded into herself, dissolving into tears. "Oh, no," Angie breathed, putting an arm around Brianna. "He proposed, and because of what Mitch said, you turned Jonas down." "Mitch reminded me how much Jonas loves being on stage." Brianna sniffed. "Eventually, Wisteria and I won't be enough for him. I couldn't bear to be left behind again, and I also can't stand the limelight. So I told Jonas no." She dragged in a shaky breath. "I tried to call him later, but he must have blocked my number. He quit the theater and closed down his house." Understanding snapped into place in Rich's mind. This explained Jonas's depression. The man did nothing halfway, so of course he was selling his house and leaving town. Leaving town. Today! No! Rich glanced at the clock above the counter. "He's leaving, but he's not gone yet. He mentioned last night he was taking the train at 3. "But that's in 15 minutes!" Brianna cried. "Then get going, you three," Cora said. Cora was already on her scooter and waving them toward the rear door. "I'll cover the shop." Rich fumbled for his keys as they rushed through the kitchen and out the back of the café, the summer heat slamming into them. By the time the two women had buckled in, he started the engine. "Rose Rue," Angie said breathlessly from the middle seat. "I know." He pulled out hard, tires humming as they cut behind the row of buildings. The truck bounced as they hit the alley, then burst out onto the street. Lilac Way blurred past as Rich took the corner fast, one hand tight on the wheel. "Please don't let me get pulled over," he prayed. "What if we miss him?" Brianna asked, her purse clutched in her lap, staring straight ahead. "We won't," Rich said, though his eyes flicked to the clock on the dash. He turned onto Rose Rue, heading south toward the station. A delivery truck ahead made his jaw tighten. "Oh, come on," Angie growled. Rich edged around it the second he could, and the station came into view at the far end of the street. The train's low horn sounded in the distance. Brianna made a broken sound. "That's not it pulling out," Rich said. "That's the warning." He pressed the accelerator. They skidded into the small gravel lot and turned so the truck slid into a parking space, as if Rich were a professional driver. They were still moving when Brianna tore open the door, jumped out, and hit the ground running. "Jonas!" she cried, sprinting toward the platform. But which car? Rich and Angie followed close behind, searching the windows. Then he saw his friend in a window seat, head bowed in dejection. "There he is." With his longer legs, Rich got to the window first and pounded on it, his palms stinging with the impact as the locomotive began to move. Jonas's head jerked up and confusion crossed his face. His gaze went to Brianna and disbelief filled his eyes. Angie ran alongside the train, waving both arms. "Stop!" she shouted. "Please stop!" The conductor, who stood near the door between cars, turned at the sound. He stared from Angie's frantic face to Brianna running to keep up with Jonas's window, where he was on his feet, pressing his hand to the glass. The conductor lifted a radio to his mouth. Rich felt it before he saw it. The train lurched a bit, and its forward motion slowed. "Thank you," Rich called to the man. When it had come to a stop, the conductor stepped onto the platform. "What's this all about?" But Jonas was already behind him. As soon as he found Brianna gasping for air, he vaulted from the locomotive and pulled her into his arms. "I made a mistake," she huffed. "I listened to rumors about you." "Oh, my darling." And Jonas kissed her. Angie took Rich's arm, rested her head against it, and gave a happy sigh. Finally, the conductor cleared his throat. "Are you staying or leaving, mister?" "Staying," Jonas said, not taking his eyes off Brianna. The conductor glanced back at the train. "Well, you have 2 minutes to get your belongings off my train." Chapter 12. Rich stepped into the café for what was becoming one of his favorite times of the day. "You regular?" Angie asked, already filling his cup. She nodded toward the table where they usually sat. Surprisingly, there was a breadboard with a spread of sausage slices, cheese, nuts, olives, vegetable sticks, crackers, and what looked like a hummus dip. His stomach growled. "What's this?" he asked as he sat and chose a slice of sausage. "I finally talked Cora into adding a few more savory options to the menu." Angie placed his coffee mug in front of him and took the seat at his side. Julia Arnold, over at the Clover Blossom Cheese Shop, agreed to give us a good deal on the cheese. "We already offer cheese scones and savory muffins," her aunt grumbled. "You know I love your sweets," Rich said, "but a hard-working guy like me needs more protein. This is perfect." "That's exactly what Angie said." Cora shook her head and scooted toward the kitchen. "I'm going to play with a new recipe while things are quiet." "What new recipe?" he whispered. "I've been telling her how high protein is all the rage anymore, even with baked goods." Angie dipped a carrot stick into the hummus. "So she's determined to make something high protein to put in the bake-off at the county fair." "I can't wait to try it." At the squeak of the scooter, Rich asked, "How's her ankle?" Angie swallowed. "The doc is putting on a walking cast next week, and she's excited, but I can tell she's a little worried it will hurt." "I hope not." He rubbed his chin. "It was bad at first, but having you here has made an enormous difference." "I'm glad." Angie's eyes took on a shimmer. "I wish I'd come without being asked." "She understood you were dealing with a lot, so don't beat yourself up. We were here to fill in the gap." Sniffing, Angie nodded. They sipped in companionable quiet. Outside, someone walked past with a dog. Inside, the faint hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock stitched the moment together. There was never any pressure on him to talk unless he chose to. The bell over the door chimed as Brianna and Jonas entered. "Hi, guys!" Angie cried, rising. "Want to join us?" Rich asked, standing. "No." Brianna crossed the cafe in 3 quick steps and wrapped Angie in a hug. "We wanted to come by and thank you both for your help." "So much so." Jonas clapped Rich on the shoulder. "And to think you irritated me by coming to visit me all the time. I was sure you were going to give away that I was back in town for a while." Rich shook his head. "It's just lucky I remembered where I saw that petal in time." "That was too close." Brianna held up her left hand, turning it just enough for the ring on her 3rd finger to catch the light. "Oh," Angie squealed. "Congratulations." She said yes this time. Jonas ran a finger across his forehead as he exhaled. "I'm happy for you both," Rich said. Brianna beamed. "It's in September. We're keeping it small, and we would love you both to come." "Of course," Angie said. Rich inclined his head. "Wouldn't miss it." "Thank you again," Brianna said, and they left. "Well, that was nice." Angie sank back into her chair. Rich nodded, staring at his coffee for a moment. "Do you mind if I bounce an idea off you?" "Not at all." She gave him her full attention. He explained about trying to decide what to do with his father's business. "I've been getting calls from people wanting larger projects than I can do as a handyman. Additions, remodels. As an architect, I could design and plan them, but my license limits the size and scope." "Isn't that a good problem?" she asked, a question in her eyes. "Well, yes and no." Rich tapped the table, wondering if she could understand. "It sounds like you need a contractor's license, but you already have a degree." Angie arched a brow. "Bless her for being so smart." "Exactly that. And I'm not sure there's enough business in Wisteria for an architect." She tilted her head, gaze turning unfocused for a moment. "Would there be for the surrounding communities, too?" "I've thought of that, but a part of me doesn't want to let my dad's business go." "What if you had a partner who was a contractor and could handle the larger projects?" "That's what I've been considering. Someone who can pull permits and handle the insurance side while I focus on the design part. And I could still do some of the handyman projects," Rich said. "I enjoy getting in with my hands." "You don't want to return to Boston?" Angie didn't quite meet his gaze. Did she want him to remain? Was she staying too? "I've given it a lot of thought," Rich said slowly. "Boston's not for me." "Well, I'm glad to hear that," Cora called from the kitchen. "I've been saving up for years to remodel my house, but I want it done right. I can be your first architect client in Wisteria." "Then it sounds like you ought to find someone to do the contracting," Angie said with a grin. "Do you know anyone who would prefer to do it only part-time? That might work if, or until, you get big enough that you need someone full-time." "I like that idea," Rich nodded. "Perfect," Cora butted in again. "You can come to dinner tonight and we'll discuss plans. I want Angie to be part of the design. She has ideas about things I never think about." "Well, thanks." He glanced at his phone. "I've got an appointment. It's likely going to be another of those large projects a handyman license won't let me do." "See you at 6," Angie said, and gathered up what was left of what she was thinking of as a savory board. Because of the heat, Angie had planned a simple dinner of grilled chicken and corn, plus a salad. She'd programmed the bread machine, and the smell of it baking met them as she and Cora entered the house. "You go rest that ankle while I get the grill going," Angie insisted. "I can set the table," her aunt said, though she looked tired. "We're doing paper plates tonight." Angie pointed to Cora's favorite chair. "Then we can put them in the fire pit for s'mores later, when it cools down." "All right." How quickly she agreed told Angie everything she needed to know. It made her wonder how much longer her aunt would even want to run the shop. She sure shouldn't be doing it by herself anymore. Rich showed up early with a bag of sugar, some lemons, and a bottle of sparkling water. "What's this?" Angie asked as she opened the door for him. "Oh, he makes the best lemonade," her aunt called. "I even have some frozen blackberries to spice it up." He gave Cora a quick kiss on the cheek before setting himself up in the kitchen. Angie went out to check on the meat, and before long it was ready to eat. As she had suggested, they set their paper plates aside to take out to the fire pit later. Then they settled around the table, and Cora surprised Angie with a long list of proposed changes to the house. "I've been saving Rod's life insurance for 10 years just for this." Cora covered Angie's hand. "This house will be yours when I'm gone. No, don't get that horrified look. We both know I won't live forever, and you've always been the child of my heart." Angie couldn't stop the tears, and Rich fetched the tissue box for her. "I didn't mean to make you cry, my dear, but I will be frank. I know you had a whole life back in Seattle, but I'm going to be selfish and ask you to stay here," Cora said, her cheeks flushed, her expression turning vulnerable. "With me. And that's why I need you in on this remodel. You don't have to decide now. Just think about it." When she reached for her scooter, Angie covered her hand. "Cora, I've already decided I don't want to go back to Seattle." She gave her a wobbly smile. "I would love to stay here." "Oh, you dear child." Angie rose and hugged her aunt, a little awkwardly. "Now you go rest your foot. Rich and I will go through the confessions." "Wow," Rich said once the television murmured to life in the next room. "It looks like we're both staying in Wisteria." "Cora used to always tell me that life happens while we're making other plans." Rich smiled. "John Lennon." "I didn't know that," Angie said as she retrieved the confession box from the side table. "I feel special," he whispered as she removed the lid. "Like I've been allowed to peek at the secrets of the community." Angie almost burst out laughing, thinking of the one she'd written all those years ago, about him. Most of them are just short bits, like they just need to write it down and get it off their chest. Some, like Brianna's, are full of regret. Those are the ones that grab me because I can't help thinking that, with just a little help, lives can be changed for the better. You'll see. The first few notes were familiar in tone, gratitude, apologies, small regrets that came from ordinary days and ordinary people. Then Rich chuckled and handed one to her. "I thought it would be funny to change my buddy's ringtone to a duck quack. He forgot to silence his phone at his grandfather's funeral and it went off. I feel terrible." "Oh, no. Can you imagine?" Angie set that one aside for Cora to see. "I think some of these end up being sent to Miss Minerva," Angie said, glancing toward the living room. "Aunt Cora couldn't." Angie shook her head. "No way." She and Rich continued like that for a while, and she had fun sharing them with her old friend. At some point, she stopped noticing the tick of the grandfather clock, the faint murmur of the television in the next room, the summer dark pressing soft against the windows. There was only the lamplight and the next folded note and Rich's quiet laugh when something tickled him. They read a few more, and then she silently handed hers to Rich. "I put garden gnomes in my neighbor's yard as a joke. He replaced them with clowns, all staring at my windows. They're giving me nightmares. When I asked him to move them, he just gave me a sly grin. I'm considering selling my house." "I've seen those," Rich said, his eyes twinkling. "They're seriously creepy." Angie caught herself mid-laugh at the gnome confession and went still for a moment. This was what peace felt like. She'd had hints of it earlier in her visit, but this was stronger and something she'd almost forgotten. It wasn't the absence of grief. By now she understood that it didn't truly leave so much as learn to share the space. But underneath the pain, steady and patient, something like hope had been there all along, waiting for her to find her way back to it. The same thing she had caught the barest trace of on the drive in, carried on the air with the same damp earth and easy green of home. Home. She knew what it was now. What a gift to be alive and not minding. Rich glanced over and must have seen something on her face. He didn't ask. That was something she'd always loved about him, never pushing for answers she wasn't ready to give, especially now as she was discovering who she was again. He just smiled and handed her the next note. It didn't have to stop, not with him remaining in Wisteria and her moving in permanently with Cora. For the first time since the accident, The future felt like something she could walk toward, rather than something happening to her. Then her fingers brushed against thick paper. She drew out an unmarked envelope. Not everyone wrote something on the stationery provided by the café. This felt different, like Brianna's had. "You seem so serious all of a sudden," Rich said, peering over her shoulder. Angie shifted as she opened it, so he could read it too. "Some things were never meant to be forgiven, and I don't know what I'll do if the truth ever comes out." "Oh dear," Angie whispered. She glanced at Rich. He was already smiling, as if he'd reached the same conclusion she had. Wisteria, it seemed, still had questions. As you can tell, now that you've listened to the audiobook of Velvet Regret, I like mystery stories, but when it comes to writing them, I'm not much of a murder mystery person. I hope that the interactions of the characters, Cora was especially fun to write. She's such a hoot. And Rich and Angie were a lot of fun. Having been a widow myself, I can only imagine what it must be to lose your entire family. My own mother died when I was a teenager, and then I was a widow myself 12 years later, so I do understand that terrible loss that you can experience. I wanted to carry that into Angie's decision to move to Wisteria, to help with the aunt, who was the person that she'd especially connected with growing up, since she's a little bit intellectually and emotionally alienated from her parents, although that's something that's only hinted at in the words on the page for Velvet Regret. Anyway, Rich was a fun guy too to write, somebody who also has a life-changing experience that brings him back home and has him evaluating what he wants to do with his life. Comes to play when he meets this old childhood friend. I have some other books that have mysteries or suspense as part of them, quite a few of them. I hope you'll check my list of books and give others a try if you're interested. Thank you. This has been Velvet Regret, Mystery on Lilac Lane, written by Donna K. Weaver, narrated by Rae Kinsley. Copyright 2026 by Donna K. Weaver. Production copyright by Donna K. Weaver.